Well, let's get started. Donnel, how are you today?
Like, how about you, Doug?
Doing great. I'm assuming you are in a warm place in Hawaii.
Yes, Hawaii winter has started though, so it's about 75 degrees instead of 80.
Oh, what a bummer. And I hope you've got fruits and vegetables because I understand the airlines are all disrupted right now.
Yeah, yes. We've got a few growing in the yard actually as well.
Well, good. Hopefully enough to sustain your family.
Yep.
So keep going. Why don't you explain a little bit about yourself, who you are in your career? We've known each other through this virtual study group, I guess, for a couple of years. Though I don't know if I've shaken your hand. If so,
Yeah,
it
I
was
don't I don't
in
think
passing.
so.
All right.
Not in person at least. My background is in educational and clinical psychology. I've worked since early 2000 as a therapist and a director for a group of centers for kids and families with emotional disabilities before I found my way into this field in 2013 was my first introduction to it. I work with families in business, primarily looking at trying to help them come together around a shared vision, or at least identify options for shared visions that they can then explore and figure out what their pathway forward is. My mentor, Leslie Dashew, has a way of thinking about, the essence of what we do. And she says we teach the skills to develop safety and structure that enable families to move forward with some level of objectivity.
Skills, safety, and structure. That sounds like a version of Mackenzie's 7 S's. I like it.
Yeah.
Shorter.
Yeah. And I think, in more recent times, this is a lot of where I think you and I have connected. I've been particularly interested in trying to find a way to leverage the technologies that are coming out now with AI and figure out how to be a person who's on the side of, altruistic intention with their use and in the hopes of developing things that can be of benefit to all.
Well, this call is an example of that, right? Leaning on new technologies so that we're able to connect and sort of feel like we're near one another and could grab a drink or exchange a handshake or a hug or talk about some author that we share.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned 2013. Was there a triggering event? Was there a mentor? Was there a client? Was something that kind of led you at that time?
It's funny. I tell people oftentimes that I believe that this particular field finds you.
Yes.
It's not, common to hear somebody say that they decided they wanted to be a family business advisor and plotted a path towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And the most succinct version of my story is that I grew up spending a lot of time on a small Caribbean island in the summers and
Mm-hmm.
watched how that island changed, and small families, mom and pop sort of sold, weren't part of the change. And my dad had asked me in the 90s, he said, if you could do anything that didn't require you to be paid to make a living, what would it be? And randomly I said, I would love to find ways to help. It's like the ones that we knew down in the islands be a part of change rather than swept away by it.
Oof.
And had no idea what I was getting myself into there. But fast forward to 2013, I was working on a PhD in educational psychology at University of Hawaii and started doing research on mentoring between parents and adult children.
Mm.
And it turned out to be a tremendous gap in the academic literature. So I had opportunities to write book chapters and to speak at international conferences. And while I was doing that, someone said, you need to meet Leslie Dashew of the Aspen Family Business Group.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And since then, keep going. What's your tie to Aspen?
So Leslie and I partnered on a workshop in Hawaii. She has clients out here and just really connected. And at the time, the Aspen Group was functioning somewhat like a think tank. And that had been how it was historically since the mid 80s, where the people who were a part of it would refer to each other's private practices. But Leslie brought me in, and I mean, she's been a mentor ever since, and her influence in my life has completely changed my life in ways that I would have never imagined. But one of the prouder moments, I think, in all of this has taken place in the last year. And it's almost as if I've had an opportunity to respond to that call I gave to myself back in the 90s. And we converted the Aspen Family Business Group from an LLC to a nonprofit.
Love that.
And that the mission of that nonprofit is to take what you and I do at a bespoke level and to create access for families that might not be able to afford having an individual advisor come into their system. And
Or
there's been
know
a
their needs.
wonderful yeah, and there's been a wonderful byproduct to this too, is it's improved access for my existing clients and
Mm.
their learning.
Yeah, one of the things I I recall us talking about is the way you guys have embraced technologies. You've done a couple things I know. One is to have the donate now button, which is very clever. I hope it's been lucrative. But the second and more important one is to digitize some of your content. I think. Talk about that.
Yeah, there's with AI, there's like, there's the large language models, right? And that's the Chat GPT and others like that, where they draw from everything that's out on the web, which means you might ask it a question about something technical and you would have gossip from Reddit would be part of what was considered in the answer.
None of which we need.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But what we decided to do was to have a highly curated small language model. And we started moving in this direction about 2 years ago and officially got to work with some tech developers about a year ago. And what we did is we took the writings that belong to the Aspen Family Business Group and its current members from the last couple decades, and we have this curated knowledge base where when people come and use familybusiness.ai, which
Hmm.
we've affectionately named Sam, it's a nod
Just
to
because.
it's a nod to Sam Lane, who was a member of the Aspen Group early on. And it's also a nod to Sam, who's one of the tech developers who's been helping us, who's a wonderful guy.
And it's short and easy to say, and people can spell it and all that. I love it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we built that so that there would be something that would have you could count on it having integrity, minimizing the risk of hallucinations.
Hmm.
And there
And
was an
not
interest.
populating the LLM. So it's your privately curated library, if I get it right, and it won't share any of that, including people's histories, their patterns. If they should ask about whatever, it won't populate into the large language models. Is that correct?
And there's also, one of the things that's kind of bubbling up with AI is concern about the environmental impact in terms of
Yes.
the energy demands, right? And so what I believe will be a trend, if it's not already, is the use of what's called RAG technology, and it's RAG. It's an acronym, and I can never remember what it stands for, but so forgive me there. But basically, how it works is if you've ever used one of those AIs that reads a document for you and makes it so you can interact with the document, that's RAG technology, and it uses a tiny, tiny amount of energy to do that
Mm,
compared to large language models.
mm.
And that's built into the way that our AI interfaces with a resource center that we have on a website.
So I'm delighted to hear it because you and I share this passion. I created a similar one with a bunch of my books and content called Gray Matters because people tease me forever, and that was just a nickname I had decades ago. But I give it to all my clients. So I'm curious about what you've learned in 2 years. You created this, or the last 2 years you've created it. I assume you've given it to all your clients. How are they using it? What are they doing? Any trends? What have you noticed?
I think the biggest thing I've noticed is I've cut costs for my clients.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I've improved the quality of work that I can deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And I was giving a talk about using this technology to a group of about 80 family business owners. And in the audience, there was someone who was an advisor. And I was told after giving this talk that when I mentioned cutting costs for time with advisor, there was an audible gasp that came from somewhere in the audience.
Not from him. Someone else.
Someone. But the thing is, like what I do is I encourage families to use it
Yeah.
to take an initial pass at whatever issue that they're facing in a brainstorming sort of way. So it's not about like there's two ways I think people can come at the use of this technology primarily. One is to come in and try and find ways to get it to do whatever it is you want to have done for you. And there's certain times where that's appropriate. But the other way is to use it as a thought partner
Hmm.
and to come in and tell it what you're thinking of doing and ask it to poke holes in that or
That's right.
expand on it.
And then this is fresh for me because on Friday I was with a client and they happen to have some folks from PwC who do their family office integration stuff. Fascinating
Yeah.
conversation. And one of the prompts that they encouraged everybody to ask is, near the end of your prompt or as you edit your prompts, if you've got a series of prompts, what am I missing? Or ask me what else. And it made me curious. How come AI isn't already programmed with that question? Right?
Isn't that something? And,
It's
and you know,
reflex.
there have you have you heard some of the, discussion around how it's almost too what is it, congenial? You
Yes,
know,
I have.
and that's
Well, let's
and
talk
that
about that because it's friendly, it's
yeah.
validating, it's your best friend, don't you know? Which leads,
Mhm.
as you know, to some accelerated affirmation for whatever your ideas might be. And some people are using this as a therapeutic tool that
Mhm.
provides an inflated view of them, their capacity, their strengths. I don't know what. And I have met people, I'm guessing you have too, who say, you know, AI, whatever platform they select, is my best friend. And it's better than any human. And I've leaned on it so much more. And I understand conversational tools, AI tools, are being adopted at a phenomenal rate, something like 40% of all of the users. And I thought, what? How could that be? And the speaker said, well, how many lonely people do you know? How many
Yeah.
angry folks? How many unsatisfied or anxious or distressed folks do you know? Like my daughter who's texting me right now. No, they're all learning to use this
Yeah.
as a tool. Have you noticed that as well?
I
The usage.
have. Yeah, I have. And I think it's interesting to hear you raise this point because I do sort of think about this. And so much of what I find or have found over the years in doing this work is that family business or not, what we are really getting involved in is like the essence of what it is to be a human.
Now you're
W-
talking.
Yeah.
Yes, absolute.
Yeah, and it's like, the people that are our clients are people who just happen to have to be wrestling with that like the rest of us, but where their financial or legacy welfare may also be wrapped up in it.
I think you're definitely spot on, which is why I'm nodding enthusiastically. But one of the reasons I think is because there's a generational view of assets. It's not like how do I pay the bills? How do I get through this quarter of this year? It's longer term.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's a whole thing, but I think it is a big thing, which makes some folks begin to think about generational capital, whatever that might look like. Any thoughts?
Yeah, there's what is it, the J Hughes, different kinds of
Well,
family
spiritual
capital.
capital, as you
Yeah,
would know, and human and intellectual, and I've forgotten the other one, feed the financial. So it's like,
yeah,
the fingers in our hands. And I think his argument would be that it's the spiritual capital that defines what you're talking about right now. What is it that gives life meaning and purpose? How much money is enough? How much wealth is enough? Those are biggies. And sometimes
yes.
folks aren't really able to express them by themselves. So they need a thoughtful facilitator like you to help them get there. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Natalie McVeigh and I had a really fantastic discussion recently about how the stages of grief manifest themselves throughout people's lives and, moments of transition, but how they can show up for families and business when they make a decision to pivot away from what they have been doing.
Hmm.
And it's like there was a number of years ago where I was talking to some guys who wanted to work on a documentary called Redefining Legacy. That was what we were going to call it.
Great title.
Yeah. And what we wanted to do was to challenge the ideas that people had about what their legacy was, And so in a family business, a lot of times people may think it's the physical business, if it's a factory or if it's a storefront or things like that, or it's the name and, the entity.
Yes.
But a lot of times, I think if you can get them to dig deeper into that idea of purpose, you start to find that legacy can be redefined by other things that in some ways are much deeper. And legacy can be about being a good, well intended member of the community.
Mhm.
Legacy can be about, supporting people in need, about learning, about being a family that innovates or perseveres. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways this can go.
That's right. I
Yeah.
think our words and our labels and our theoretical constructs are so important. We both probably learned that in our graduate studies. And they're not talked about with many families or many of my clients. So I often give them a picture, like this is where I think legacy can go, or how it can be described, or this is what some academics think is critically important, and dot 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 dot. And then if they chum the water and they bite the fish, then off we go. But they don't always bite the fish.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
use
And
theoretical models? Because I know you got them all up here.
yeah, it's funny. You know that whole notion of like, the stages of learning or knowledge. It's where you start out and you are unconsciously incompetent and then you become consciously incompetent and on and on and on. When I work with some younger advisors, I'm really trying to do that now. I'm really trying to find my way to supporting people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Who are interested in finding their way into this full-blown family business advising thing. But I'm really interested in trying to find ways to support them. And what I'm starting to encounter is that there are like this ball of frameworks that's in my head that has become all intertwined and connected. And sometimes I need a little help to pull it out.
Oh, don't we all?
Yeah.
It's a ball. I had a client from India who was a brilliant tech person. She ended up moving into Google, but she described that as a ball of mud and sticks. And the mud and sticks get rolled down a muddy street, I guess, and then kids play soccer with it. And that's how a lot of tech is based on itself. All these little repairs that don't always work. And I
Yeah.
thought, there's an image.
Yeah, there's
Image.
a young yeah, right. There's this young woman I was talking to, and she's in her 20s. She's doing all sorts of like trainings for different frameworks and different modalities for approaching how she works as a coach. And when she raises them, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. And then I start to look at like where that comes out or how it comes out in the work that I do at this stage. But I do think that in order to be able to address the problem, you need to first be able to kind of isolate it for clients so they can call it something.
whatever
Um,
whatever model they select. So how do you do so? Most folks ask questions, I guess. Some use assessment, some have a process, some have a protocol, and it's sort of sequential. But I'm guessing you're more dynamic or flying by the seat of your pants and responding to their needs. How do you?
well, yeah, I think, one of the things I use the Hogan a lot,
Yeah, me too.
and I lean heavily into the MVPI section of it.
For obvious
And
reasons. Say more about what it
yeah.
is.
And so the MVPI, that's motives, values, and preferences inventory. And I liken it to helping people to identify the well from which they draw their energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that if it's like, I think it's common for people to see certain behaviors and make the assumption that the thing that would drive those behaviors would always be one particular set of values. So I'll use this example is that if you have there was a CEO of a company I was working with who convinced him to spend more time being social with some of the employees in mid-level management and down.
Hmm.
Okay. There were family owners who had historically done that, and that was part of the culture of the organization. And they did it because they came from a well that valued connection and being altruistic and making sure that they were really looking out for the employees. The CEO was an easy sell on doing that when I helped him understand that well-known research that if you are well engaged with employees, it boosts job satisfaction, it boosts productivity. And he would do that because he was concerned with the bottom line.
Oh, good. Good for you and good for him. Yep. So you use the values and a comprehension of the system of values to help him change his individual behavior. I'm guessing you also do values work at each generational level, but I would assume you do. And I'm guessing that sometimes this cohort's group of values is quite different from an older cohort's group of values. Yeah.
Yeah, or sometimes they're the same and they're just expressed differently. And I think, for helping people to bridge those gaps, that's part of I always make that a key part of what I'm doing when I'm working with families on developing a shared vision or
Hmm.
options for a shared vision.
Hmm.
And like, what is it, if these are the values that you guys are aligned on, what does that look like if you were to do that optimally for the next couple years? How does that translate into behavior of the family, behavior of, how you strategically lead the business
Yep.
and those kinds of things? And I feel like you can gain a lot of traction for bringing people together, and you can also help people to identify those ways, like the CEO and the family members, to come together on a behavior that's in everybody's best interest
Hmm.
if they're able to understand what directs them to it.
So I'm curious about labels because we talked about it a second ago. And
Hmm.
you mentioned family business advisors. You're making me think about your capacity as a family business psychologist or a family wealth advisor or a family alchemist. I don't know what it would be, but how do you self describe?
So one of the things that another mentor, Joe Paul, another former mentor of the Aspen Family Business Group, who he passed away recently, and Joe did a lot with personal purpose.
Uh-huh.
And he said that it ended up being one of the things that his clients often said it was the most valuable thing that he ever did with them. And I worked on mine with him, and it's a statement that I have in a Word document that's evolved over the years. And it's basically that I see myself as someone who comes in and is in their ideal place, no matter what the context is in my life, when I'm able to support people who are in times of transition to find solutions and options that are creative and compassionate to help them move forward. And so maybe there's, leading into this conversation with you and reflecting on who I am as an advisor, I kept coming back to that. Now, the way that that translates into more of a practical manner of how I do what I do is, as the years have gone on, I think part of the nature of this work is we have our entry point, which for me is that expert in, learning relationships and mentoring and clinical issues. And that's our core. But then we start to become informed generalists in other areas. So what that means too is that, like, I can sit in and hear somebody describe how they're working as a board, and I can, start to spot out what are some of the things that they're on target with in terms of their governance structure and other things that they may need to work on. Now,
Hmm.
do I then advise the board on governance? No. What I do is I take that information and I connect them to a colleague who is an expert in that domain. And so I try and, keep myself mostly grounded on the family, but also in leadership development. Those are two of my sort of core areas.
That makes sense. And that's your career story. So you've done this for decades now. You mentioned 2013 as an inception point or a seminal point. Have you noticed some changes in your clients, trends perhaps?
The biggest one is that I don't know that this is any indication of like societal change or anything like that. It's more like just my practice is I'm having increasingly more like fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation folks becoming a part of my clientele. That's probably
Well,
the biggest change.
that's an interesting observation because I would assume you can handle the complexity, the emotional complexity, maybe the material wealth in a sensitive way. You used some beautiful words to describe your strengths a few minutes ago. I'd imagine that people would be attracted to that. So
Yeah,
let's flip
yeah, go
to
ahead.
the future, man. When you imagine what your work could look like in the next, say, 10 years, any shift or more use of AI or,
I think, AI is going to be increasingly a part of what we do. And the horse is out of the barn.
oh, yeah,
And yep. And there's a wonderful TED talk by Saul Khan, the guy who started Academy.
and
It's from
some
about,
schools now. Are you aware?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. A Force for Good. And this TED talk is from 2 years ago. And he acknowledges that there are definitely going to be people who are bad actors in how they use this. It's already obvious that that's the case. And there's some scary things about it.
Right.
But Saul Khan's position is one that I very much subscribe to, which is the people who have benevolent intention for the rest of mankind need to jump on it and make sure that they are playing a part in influencing how the AI itself develops more
Mhm.
broadly, and also figuring out ways that they can leverage this to mitigate any sort of nefarious attempts at using it.
I love that because, like you, I care about benevolent behavior. Do you remember when Google started and they said, we will do no evil? And everybody said, why take the negative? Why go dark to say what we won't do?
Yeah.
And now there's massive awareness that the digital access to your confidential information and mine is out there. It's ubiquitous. It's hard to protect, I guess. It makes me curious about the role of benevolence ahead. For instance, one measure of trust you might might have studied looks at the ability to show trust, benevolence, the assumption that the other person's good and worth trusting, and then integrity is the behavioral capacity to model that. I like that ABI model because it makes benevolence so important. Do you really think benevolence is going to become like an Edelman Trust Index? We'll have the Edelman Benevolence or the Donnel
Hmm.
Nunes Benevolence Index one day.
Interesting. That's an interesting thing. And I will tell you where I look for it in the work that I do is when I'm meeting with new clients for their benefit and for my benefit, I do try and find congruence around certain values.
Yours and theirs. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, these are long-term relationships that we're building. And I don't want to, take them in a direction that isn't aligned with where they want to go any more than I want to be on that mission from
Right.
my end.
Hmm.
And so I look for folks that are committed to growing and learning. And I also look for folks who have some evidence of philanthropy,
Hmm.
either what they're currently doing or aspirations to do it.
Hmm.
And I think in my life, that in my work, that's the benevolent piece, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah. So maybe your question about philanthropy, where are you now and where do you want to be aspirationally, is a way for you to get at the value of benevolence. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it says a lot and about, who people are when those
Yeah,
things are a part of what they do.
that's right. Maybe it's your one item benevolence assessment, the
Yeah,
Donnell
right.
assessment.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that's long been a mantra in the Aspen Family Business Group is an idea doesn't care who has it. And
Right.
so I'm perfectly open to someone else developing that assessment and letting me use it.
I hear you. And I'm aware that you've cited four or five, maybe six other people in our conversation, which reminds me that you're analytical and theoretical and you're leaning on some of those mentors. So when I think about what's next for you, also, I imagine it's going to be a team of advisors because you said that that's how you prefer to work. Are there certain kinds of advisors you'd love to find in the future?
Right now, I think I've reached a point in my career where I'm busy enough that I don't worry about that as much as I maybe used to while you're
Hmm.
building your practice. And I'm also recognizing because of the incredible mentorship that I've seen from Leslie and how gracefully she's supported the succession in our own group and how amazing she's been in her support of me, that I want to be less directive when working with younger advisors and more collaborative and supportive. And so I think in the future, an ideal would be for me to be more at the 35,000-foot level, um, with the client work that I do
Hmm.
or with other projects that I get involved in, and to have younger um, folks who want to do good in the world, collaborating with me and
Hmm.
helping to develop them as they take on more of the tactical work that comes with some of the client work.
It's a perfect answer because it's consistent with your coursework and your research, I think, but also you as a father. Imagine when we think
Yeah,
about this, the reasons why we're attracted to this kind of work are ontological. How are we going
yeah.
to provide for future generations of and that makes me ask, have you got a number in mind? Like if you tracked all the number of people you've touched in your career, I bet it's 5,000 people. I bet it's a big number. But when you imagine ahead, is there a number that comes to your mind? How many of those younger advisors do you want to help shape and develop?
If it's through my private practice, it's not a gigantic number, you
Hmm.
know, but through the nonprofit, what our sort of BHAG as a group is that at some point we are represented at Davos. And
Don't hold back. Don't hold back,
yep,
Donnell.
yep. And this is Joyce Herenya, one of our members, like that. She's the one who set that as the BHAG benchmark. And I believe it's possible. Here's the funniest thing is it's not because any of us want that for recognition. It's we want that because we know that if that happens, it means that the mission that we are striving for has been realized at its greatest level. In fact, one of the biggest vulnerabilities for us as a group is none of us crave recognition as a main driver. And so it's hard to get us to do some of the promotional things we need to do.
All right. But to get to that public recognition at Davos, wouldn't it be tied to your generosity, your philanthropy, your giving
Yeah.
as a .org? I love that vision. That's
Yeah.
exciting. And that
Yeah.
implies that you're going to have to do some kind of promotion about whatever the number is for your
Yeah.
giving.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because I think, when we look at like the writings that were done by the seminal people in our field in the 80s, it's not like those things fell out of date. The context in which they are written about may be out of date, but they're principles.
Yes.
And I think that that means that they are principles with some cultural sensitivity in other parts of the world.
Yes. Which is why they're adopted. Yeah. I think you and I have this bias toward this country and some of the academics
Oh,
who
for
are
sure. For
some of that
sure.
content. It's also striking to me some of the groups that are still around, FFI and PPI, some of the consultancies that are larger, were all started at that time, roughly 35 years ago, which
Right.
I don't know what it means, but it might suggest that there's room for you to do more writing. Are you?
You know, you're calling me out here, and I think what happened
With
when
love or
I
with benevolence?
yeah, yeah, that's something else that I completed my PhD in 2018, and at the same time that I was working on my dissertation research and writing my dissertation, which ended up being really long. I was writing a chapter for the Sage Handbook on mentoring
Mm,
and writing another chapter for a book about mentoring and coaching in the Asian Pacific.
mm,
And when I got to the end of that, it kind of fried me on the
yeah,
writing side of things.
yeah,
And I think it's only been maybe in the last year or two, that I've started doing a little more. But I do know that if I write anything beyond smaller articles, one of the things I would really love to do is to write about my research on mentoring between parents and adult children, because I absolutely believe it's unique and I believe it's relevant to all. When I did the research, I spoke to people from places around the world, and it's something I really believe parents could benefit from.
hugely.
There's, yeah, I'll share this one little thing that somebody shared with me a couple years ago. It's the best way I can think of capturing the essence of parenting, and it's that in the first part of your children's life, you're their manager, and as their manager, you will inevitably be. So the best you can hope for is to be rehired as their advisor.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah. And that's where that mentoring comes in.
What a beautiful shift. One of the things I've noticed is that some of the people who advocate for mentoring, like Scott Galloway at NYU comes to mind, he wants to focus on young men because of their isolation, social isolation, and ineptitudes in various ways. And others will focus on young women. But nobody does, to my knowledge, what you just said. Let's focus on young people and how do we support mentoring for people. Are there leaders out there who are, in fact,
Supporting young people.
in that way, that broad way, but an academic based way, not I care about the next cohort of contributors to our church or our community or a Rotary Club, not that. Broader, the social construct. Anything coming to mind? Any one coming to mind? Any group coming to mind?
Yeah, there's the Good Man Project,
Good
I
example.
think, is one. There were, under Obama, there were a bunch of mentoring initiatives that were also done.
Hmm.
But I don't know if they've carried on. But
Let me ask you about one that's sort of a similar, it just triggered. I was a member of Rotary for a number of years, and there's a program for younger people who are interested in social good called Rotor Act. And I don't remember the ages, maybe 22 to 30 or 35 or something. And my daughter was intrigued by that. So she went to her college and said, why don't we create a Rotor Act group? And she created a Rotor Act group, and it still continues. That's an example of something that maybe the Aspen Family Business Group has as its vision to create cohorts of. But am I pushing too much or?
Not at all. I think that part of the vision is also to eventually, where there's this gap in the runway for people to go from being, say, a coach in their 20s and 30s to being a family systems advisor.
Mhm.
We're thinking if we can reach a certain scale, we can provide that runway. And part of our hope with that as well is that the people who pass through supporting the nonprofit understand the importance of having this,
Yes.
but that there's also growing support for this. We call it our knowledge ecosystem, which is all the content on the website and all the things that are in the AI interfacing together. That's the knowledge ecosystem, that continues to be fed by people doing good work and makes it more and more impactful. So I think there'll be room in that for young advisors to be supported, I think, in that kind of way. I'm wondering where you're gaining the most traction in your own use of AI in your practice.
Like you, I'm more digitally trusting than some of our clients. I've given presentations and written a fair amount and had a number of downloads of articles on familybusiness.org, for instance, an article I wrote on the use of AI in various ways, kind of practical tips. And I mentioned the Gray Matters closed LLM, which is something I find fascinating. But another one is JIT Coach, JIT is just in time coaching. And I had this URL
Mm.
15 years ago. At the time, a partner and I developed what we thought was AI assisted coaching and be readily purchased by our friends at Ingersoll Rand and Target because they were clients of mine at the time. They said, clever, but no, not now. But last year I launched it and it's phenomenal. So it's an AI assisted coaching tool that clients can use to practice those conversations that they can't practice or are frightened of having. For instance, with a family member, difficult sibling conversations, or a manager if you're in sales, it doesn't matter. So you pick the role play and pick the avatar and do it again and again and again. And if you're really daring, you push a little button and you share it with someone. But it
Wow.
tracks things like speed to competence. Empathy, for instance, is a variable that you know a lot about, and predictive of our emotional intelligence. Well, if we can show speed to competence faster and practice empathy faster, then JIT Coach is a pretty cool tool. I'll give you two more because that's what I've been doing a little bit. I like projects. You're probably familiar with the code vibing or vibe code movement. I'm not a coder. I'm not analytical in that way. Replit, R-E-P-L-I-T, is one of these platforms. Lovable is the second one. So one evening when I was here in our mountain house, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could ... So I downloaded some content and I asked it to do various things. And now there's an assessment for family business succession. What do I do with
Mm.
it? I don't know. So it's cool. It's very simple, very easy for people to use. And it's sort of a business resource tool. So I had I've got a bunch of URLs, but I put it on family-wealth.org, which is not to compete in any way with yours. Yours is legitimate. Mine is aspirational. Anyways, there's an assessment there. You can click on it, and it'll give you in a millisecond a review and 6 criteria of the strengths of your family business and what you really ought to focus on and why you need to work with someone. I think that's where we're headed. Tools like
Yeah.
that are based on some content or model that makes good sense. And the other example that's kind of related is I created a 360 assessment process at assessnextgen.com, and it's marvelous. So my last two calls have been related to that. So it's sort of on my prefrontal cortex right now. But that's an amazing tool. People don't know where to go to get valid feedback on their behaviors. So when we identified those behaviors, then it was possible to create the 360 and 7 different rater groups, which is becoming a long answer to your question. But
Oh, it's
I
fascinating, Doug. I love it.
that's what we
It's
need.
really
That's what we
cool.
need. We need tools like that. So there you go.
Yeah. There's this sort of the pattern that I see that is relevant to people who work in thought leadership and things like that relative to AI is that there's a problem that they can help people capture and define, and then they become a part of helping that family or person to assemble all of the most pertinent data related to that problem
Hmm.
and to use that to craft really articulate prompts
Hmm.
that get fed into AI.
Hmm.
And then it gets kicked back to the human again in review of what the response was and any modifications. But it
Which are
keeps the
endless.
human in the loop.
That's right. Yeah. Somebody recently suggested that AI prompts are our future intellectual property, or IP.
Yeah.
And you can ask any tool to create a list of prompts that would be useful for our work. And those are sold now. They're commodities.
Yeah.
I think that's an example of how we could become better informed consultants. And,
Yeah.
well, let's wrap up. Donnell, I knew this would be a delightful conversation. I knew you'd be fun. Thank you for being available and sharing your expertise. And if folks want to reach you, what's the best way to do it?
To probably go through aspenfamilybusiness.org. I'll always be connected to that. And my own business is PVA Knowledge Group, Passion, Vision, Action. It's part of some sports psychology research that I did 25 years ago, was where that name came out of.
Nice. And still
Um,
resonates. And you've got a paddle behind you, which resonates with one of your hobbies.
oh, yeah. This particular paddle is actually about 500 years old. I know, it's a pretty cool one. It was something that my dad picked up and that I practice stewardship in caring for
Yes.
until it's ready to find its next location and
And
care.
one of your hobbies is related to some big crossing from island to island.
Yep. And keeping myself on my toes as an advisor and making sure that I am truly living up to what I expect from my clients. I try and find ways to challenge myself in what seem like somewhat proportionate ways. And
This is not
so
proportional. This is epic. You can.
yeah. This past summer I crossed the Molokai Channel on a wing foil board, and it was basically completing and defending my PhD as a waterman, as a lifelong waterman. That's how I look at it.
That's beautiful. Thank you.